Alright, on to the ring finger here. Now we do have a couple of shots of the ring finger from this side and from this side, so we are going to have a little bit more information. But I can see basically straight lines, at least for the the second half here. So I'm going to go with my clay tubes brush. And just try to fill in these little valleys and pave down the little bubbles as much as possible. Go ahead and grab the flatten brush. Hit the sides a little bit. Just try to find a balance between the rough carving and then the flattening, which kind of settles the rough carving down into a more, well, anyway, an easier to analyze state, if not a more accurate state. Okay, so a little bit of a, we're going to go ahead and flatten that top a little bit more, so I guess I'll stick with the flatten brush for now. Not much of a taper from this view. Not much to worry about yet, anyway. Go ahead and hop back over to the clay tubes brush. Kind of fill some of this in. Get a little bit of a flat plane there on the top. Even though this isn't the flattened brush, still, they both have square alphas on them, so they have a not completely dissimilar effect on the geometry. Alright, let's go and take a look at another view here. That's the view I'm interested in, so we will flip it and then zoom in a little bit. Tap the Z key and I'll come over to this finger. The only possible drawback, oh, also wherever you tap on the mesh is where the camera will rotate around. So like if you're working on one side, you hop over to the other and the rotation's crazy. Just touch that surface closest to whatever you want to work on and you'll be in pretty good shape. So we do have a little bit of like a little dent thing kind of over there. And there's definitely a bit of a fold, but we are also getting, let's see where this, so we need to update the table position, clearly. Make sure it's selected and visible. Tap Q to get out of the little transform gizmo thing. If you want to switch between different subtools, you just hold the Alt button and select the subtool that you're trying to grab there. So with all of the fingers here, it's just maybe a little bit confusing to figure out what's going on. So I'm going to isolate it with a little bit more of the knuckle in there. And I actually want to have a little bit more, let me grab the move brush. So the one thing about using move topological over the move is because move topological has to examine all of the other geometry on the mesh while you're sculpting, it can be a little bit slower than just using the regular move brush. So it really is something that you probably only want to use when you actually need the functionality. Just going to soften the boundary there at that knuckle. So now that I kind of understand what's going on there, I'm going to hide a little table stand in. And then just kind of carve this finger down a bit more. And I can see it's sort of bulging on this side and straight on that side. So I'm just going to use my clay tubes brush to minimize that bulge a little bit. Feels a little bit collapsed on this side, so we'll add a little bit more volume here just to try to get it as consistent as possible. And I'm definitely not going to worry about that level of detail just quite yet. We have kind of a ways to go before we start thinking about little wrinkles here, mostly just because the geometry is still likely to undergo a significant amount of like bigger sculpting kind of stuff. So another thing I see students do oftentimes is they're like, great, okay, well, so the finger is 30% done maybe, and time to put in the fingernail. And that's what gets turned in. And it just breaks my heart every time, because you haven't really earned that fingernail yet. You got to do a lot more refining and figuring out the anatomy. Like, it would be my strong preference to see somebody turn in a hand with no fingernails than a hand that was largely unfinished with, you know, comic book fingernails etched into some crude cylinder. Because again, that's kind of like where you're not really sculpting as much as you're just kind of like, you know, doing what you think a hand looks like. You're not really exploring or learning anything about what the reference has to show us. And that's kind of what separates the people who can do this for a living versus the people who have to go do something else. And there is certainly no shame in that, but just be aware you're not really doing yourself any favors if the larger goal is to get a job as a game artist and you're jumping the gun on the fingernails. Alright, so still kind of a strange bulge there. I'm going to take a quick glance at the top view. And flip it. And for this one, we're going to need to probably be looking at the other. It'll be a little bit confusing, right? So we'll mask it off. Kind of get it pointed in the right direction. Get a little bit of a taper from the top. All right. So with that done, I'm going to, well, done, it's a strong word to use. I'm going to continue working on all this stuff. And specifically, I think this area needs a little more work, and I think this area needs a little more work. So that's what we'll look at in the next video.